Have you ever imagined discovering that the woman who raised you was hiding a secret powerful enough to change your entire life? Stay with me, because what Claire is about to uncover will leave you speechless. And before we begin, hit the like button if you believe that family secrets always come to light. The mansion was wrapped in silence when Claire pushed open the iron gates. A cold wind stirred the ancient oak trees, as if nature itself mourned the absence of the patriarch. Her father had passed away only a week earlier, leaving behind not just assets and wealth, but a hollow emptiness that echoed in every corner of the estate. Claire's heels clicked against the stone driveway, each step heavy with responsibility she never asked for. Inside, the staff watched her quietly. Their eyes carried both respect and distance. Claire had always been the city girl, the one who had left for New York years ago to live her own life, far from the suffocating traditions of her wealthy family. Now she was forced to return, not out of choice, but to handle wills, properties, and ghosts of the past. The grand hall of the mansion felt more like a museum than a home. Oil portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her as if judging her every move. Claire picked up a leather folder left on the polished mahogany table. Inside were lists of assets, jewelry, real estate, investments, numbers on paper, cold, lifeless. And yet, something told her there was more to this inheritance than money, something her father had never spoken of. Her gaze wandered until it landed on a faded portrait tucked away in a side corridor. It was of Rose, the nanny who had cared for her and her brother when they were children. Unlike the glamorous family portraits, Rose's picture was small, almost hidden, as though someone had intentionally pushed it aside. Claire froze in front of it. Memories stirred, fragmented, incomplete. Bedtime stories whispered in a gentle voice. The smell of warm bread in the morning. A hand that always seemed to know when she was afraid. But those memories were distant, almost forgotten, buried beneath years of neglect. Rose had been more of a mother to her than her own, yet Claire realized she knew almost nothing about the woman's true life. Just then, one of the older staff members approached discreetly, holding out a heavy ring of keys. "Your father wanted you to have these when the time came," he said quietly. Claire accepted them, her fingers brushing against one unusual key, a golden one, worn and distinct from the rest. She turned it over in her hand, her heart tightening. That night, in the master bedroom, Claire couldn't sleep. The image of Rose's portrait haunted her. So did the golden key now resting in her nightstand drawer. Something inside whispered that this was not just a set of keys. It was a message. Her father, cold and distant as he had been, must have left her this clue for a reason. By morning, Claire's decision was made. She would search every corridor until she found where the golden key belonged. The mansion creaked under her steps as she wandered through hallways that smelled of old wood and secrets. At the far end of the oldest wing, she found a heavy wooden door she didn't remember from childhood. Dust coated the handle, as though it hadn't been touched in decades. Her hands trembled as she slid the key into the lock. The click echoed like a whisper from the past. Slowly, the door swung open, revealing a forgotten library. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew clung to the room. Tall shelves stretched to the ceiling, stacked with aging books. Cardboard boxes lay scattered on the floor. It felt like stepping into another time. Claire raised her phone flashlight and stepped inside. Her fingers traced the cracked spines of books, brushed across old ledgers and yellowed newspapers. She found reports of family financial crises, bankruptcies narrowly avoided. None of this had ever been spoken of. To the outside world, the family had always seemed untouchable. At the far end of the room sat a large desk draped with a heavy cloth. Claire pulled it back, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Underneath lay a neat stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw the name written on the first envelope. Rose. It was her handwriting, unmistakable even after all these years, firm, careful, almost maternal. Claire's heart raced as she untied the ribbon. The first letter began with words that shook her. I gave up what was mine, so the children would never suffer. They will never know, but I carry this choice with me every day. Claire's hands shook as she read. Rose spoke of sacrifice, of love, of renouncing something valuable to protect the family. The lines were filled with devotion, but also with pain. Claire felt her chest tighten. She sank into the dusty chair, tears blurring her vision. How did I never know? How could I have forgotten her? She whispered to herself. The weight of guilt pressed down like a stone. Every page revealed more, hints of financial ruin, of decisions made in silence, of loyalty that went unrecognized. It wasn't just a nanny's letters. It was the hidden backbone of her family's survival, and Claire realized she was holding more than paper. She was holding the truth her father had buried, the truth her Aunt Helen and the rest of the family had never spoken of. The mansion's silence seemed to deepen, as if the house itself was listening. Claire wiped her tears, tied the ribbon back around the stack, and pressed it to her chest. For the first time, she felt she wasn't just the heir to wealth and property. She was the heir to a debt, one of love and sacrifice. The question now was, would she have the courage to expose it? If you believe Claire should keep digging into these letters, hit the like button right now and subscribe to the channel. Because what she uncovers next will change everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of the mansion, but to Claire it felt cold and gray. She sat at the long dining table, the letters of Rose spread before her like sacred relics. Her coffee had gone untouched. She couldn't shake the words from her mind, words written decades earlier, words that spoke of sacrifice and secrecy. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, crisp and deliberate. Helen entered, her aunt, tall and thin with perfectly combed silver hair and a string of pearls resting against her neck. She carried herself like the true matriarch of the family now that her brother was gone. Her eyes immediately narrowed at the sight of the papers in front of Claire. "What are you doing with those?" Helen's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. Claire straightened. "They're letters. From Rose." For the briefest second, Helen's mask slipped. A flicker of recognition, maybe even fear, crossed her face before she forced it back into indifference. She reached across the table, snatched the top letter, and crumpled it in her fist. "You don't need to waste your time with this nonsense," she said firmly. "Rose was a servant. She cooked. She cleaned. She watched you as a child, nothing more. Don't romanticize her." Claire felt her pulse quicken. "That's not true. These letters, they say she gave up something. Something that belonged to her, to save us, to save this family." Helen's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about. Stop digging into things that don't concern you." But Claire refused to back down. "It does concern me. My life, everything I grew up with might have been built on her sacrifice. Don't I have the right to know the truth?" Helen slammed her palm against the table, rattling the silverware. "The truth," she said in a low hiss, "is that your father worked his whole life to protect this family's name. If you drag up the past, you'll ruin everything he built. Do you want to smear his memory?" The words stung, but Claire could see through them. Helen wasn't defending her brother's memory. She was protecting herself. There was something she didn't want revealed. Without another word, Claire gathered the letters into her arms and stormed from the room. Her aunt's voice followed her down the hallway. "Drop it, Claire. I mean it. Drop it before you regret it." But regret was already gnawing at her. The regret of never having noticed Rose's sacrifices while she was alive. Claire knew she couldn't stop now. That evening, she returned to the hidden library. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of dust and secrets. She lit a lamp this time, determined to dig deeper. For hours, she sifted through piles of forgotten documents. At last, tucked inside a folder at the bottom of a crate, she found them. Contracts, receipts, and financial statements dated from decades ago. Her hands trembled as she read. The family had been drowning in debt, properties mortgaged, accounts drained, and there, in black ink, was Rose's signature. She had transferred ownership of her own small inheritance, a modest property she once held to settle the creditors. Claire felt her chest tighten. Rose had given up everything, her security, her future, just so the mansion and the family name could survive. But there was more. Scribbled in her father's handwriting across the margin of one document was a note. "Your loyalty will remain our secret, Rose. The world must never know." Claire sank into the chair, the paper shaking in her hand. Why had her father kept this hidden? Why had he buried the truth behind pride and silence? Tears blurred her vision, but anger burned through them. She thought of Helen, of the cold dismissal in her eyes, the way she spat the word servant, as if it erased everything Rose had done. No, she wouldn't let that stand. The next morning, Claire left the mansion for the first time since her return. She drove through the small town, her heart pounding, until she reached a modest house with a porch covered in ivy. Joachim, the retired gardener who had worked for the family for 40 years, lived there now. The old man greeted her with a warm smile, though his eyes grew misty when she explained why she had come. Sitting together on the porch, Claire showed him the letters and contracts. Joachim listened quietly, then sighed deeply. "You finally found out," he said, shaking his head. "I always wondered if one of you ever would. Rose was the one who kept this family afloat. She sold her belongings, even gave up her land, all to pay off debts your father couldn't manage. And she never once asked for recognition." Claire's throat tightened. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't my father ever say anything?" "Pride," Joachim replied simply. "And shame. He couldn't bear the thought of admitting the family fortune depended on the sacrifice of a woman the world called a servant. He let her live in silence while the family basked in wealth she had secured for them." Claire wiped her eyes, overwhelmed. Joachim placed a hand on hers. "Don't let Helen stop you. She knows the truth, too. She's just afraid of what happens when it comes out." That night, back in the mansion, Claire sat in her childhood room surrounded by letters, contracts, and memories. She stared at the portrait of Rose she had moved from the side hallway to rest on her nightstand. Rose's eyes seemed to look right through her, steady and kind, urging her not to give up. Claire whispered into the quiet, "I'll make them see you. I promise." The storm outside rattled the windows, and Claire felt as though the house itself trembled with the weight of the truth pressing against its walls. She knew that exposing it would mean conflict, maybe even exile from her family, but staying silent would mean betraying the woman who had given her everything. Her decision was clear. She would confront them all. The following day, she walked into the main hall, her arms filled with documents and letters. Helen was there, sipping tea as though nothing could touch her. Claire laid the papers on the table between them. "Explain this," she demanded. Helen's eyes darted across the documents, her composure cracking. "Where did you get these?" "The library. The one father locked away. You can't deny it anymore, Aunt. Rose gave up her inheritance for us. She saved this family. And we repaid her by treating her like she was invisible." Helen's hands clenched around the teacup. "You don't understand." "No," Claire interrupted, her voice trembling but firm. "I understand perfectly. You've buried the truth because it doesn't fit the image you want the world to see. But I won't stay silent. I won't let her be forgotten." The tea spilled as Helen slammed her cup down. Her eyes blazed with fury. "If you expose this, you'll destroy everything your father built. You'll disgrace our name." Claire leaned forward, her voice steady. "The disgrace isn't in telling the truth. The disgrace is in pretending she didn't exist." The words hung heavy in the air. Helen's face twisted with anger, but she said nothing more. Claire gathered the documents back into her arms and walked out, her steps echoing through the hall. For the first time in her life, she felt strong, terrified, but strong. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale golden light across the mansion. Claire lifted her face to it and whispered, "This is for you, Rose." The battle had only just begun. The mansion seemed heavier with every passing day, as though the very walls were burdened with the secrets they had been forced to contain. Claire moved through the corridors with a determined stride now, her arms often filled with letters, contracts, and notes from the hidden library. She no longer felt like a visitor in her own childhood home. She felt like an investigator, piecing together the story of a woman who had been erased. At night, she read by the dim light of a lamp, tracing Rose's handwriting with her fingertips. The words spoke not only of sacrifice but of choices made in silence, choices that had defined the course of Claire's entire family without anyone admitting it. Each letter deepened her sense of shame and gratitude. Each letter also made her resolve stronger. But Helen's shadow loomed everywhere. Her aunt's disapproving glances, her cold remarks at the breakfast table, and her warnings to let the past rest were constant. Helen had even begun speaking to the other relatives, poisoning their minds with talk of Claire being unstable, grieving too hard, clinging to sentimental illusions. The whispers began almost immediately. Cousins avoided her gaze. An uncle muttered at dinner, "Why can't you leave it alone, Claire? What good will come from stirring the ashes?" Another added, "Your father wanted the family name to remain untarnished. You dishonor him by dragging this up." Claire listened, silent but unshaken. Deep down, she knew these weren't really their words. They were Helen's. Her aunt had always been skilled at controlling the narrative, at ensuring no one dared to challenge her authority. Still, the rejection stung. One evening, after another round of accusations, Claire retreated to the library, clutching the diary she had discovered days earlier. She sat on the floor, leaning against a dusty shelf, and let the tears fall freely. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she whispered into the empty room. "They all hate me for this. Maybe I should stop." Her eyes fell on a passage in Rose's diary written in careful cursive. "The children must never feel the weight of my choices. They must grow free without shame. If they forget me, so be it, as long as they are safe." Claire pressed her hand to the page. "You didn't deserve to be forgotten," she said firmly, "and I won't let them erase you." The next day, she decided she couldn't fight this battle alone. She began visiting former employees of the estate, people who had known Rose when she was alive. Each conversation brought another piece of the puzzle. Mr. Jensen, the old chauffeur, told her about nights when Rose pawned her jewelry to cover unpaid bills. Mrs. Alvarez, who once worked in the kitchen, revealed that Rose secretly paid wages when the family couldn't. Each story painted a clearer picture. While the world saw the patriarch as the provider, it was Rose who had kept the family afloat. When Claire returned with these testimonies, she tried once more to share them with her relatives. She gathered them in the parlor, laying the documents and letters on the table, speaking with passion about Rose's sacrifices. "She wasn't just a nanny," Claire said, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry across the room. "She gave up her inheritance, her possessions, even her chance at her own happiness to keep this family alive. We owe her everything." Her words were met with silence. Then Helen stood, her chin raised. "What you call sacrifice, I call exaggeration. She was a servant. She was paid for her duties. Nothing more." "She gave away her land," Claire shot back. "That's not part of her job description. That's love." The room erupted in murmurs. Some relatives sided with Helen, nodding in agreement, unwilling to tarnish the polished image of the family name. Others looked down, ashamed, as though Claire's words had struck a nerve they couldn't deny. Finally, one of her cousins, a woman named Margaret, spoke quietly. "I remember. I was very young, but I remember Rose crying one night in the kitchen. She thought no one was watching. My mother told me never to mention it. But now I wonder if it was because of everything she sacrificed." The room grew tense. Helen's face hardened, but Claire felt a spark of hope. The truth was beginning to crack through the walls of denial. Later that night, Claire sat alone in her room staring at the pile of evidence. The fear of losing her family weighed on her, but she reminded herself of the promise she had made to Rose's memory. The turning point came unexpectedly. While searching once more through the hidden library, Claire discovered a small wooden box at the back of a shelf. It was locked, but the golden key she carried fit perfectly. Inside was a leather folder containing contracts signed by her father himself. The contracts confirmed everything. Rose had formally transferred her property to cover the family's debts. Attached was a handwritten note from her father. "Rose, your loyalty is greater than gold. One day, Claire must know." Her breath caught. The words were like a message from beyond the grave, validation from her father himself that this truth was not meant to stay buried. Claire clutched the folder to her chest, trembling. She imagined Rose's gentle hands, her warm smile, the quiet strength she had shown every day. Claire whispered, "I'll show them. I'll show everyone." The following evening, she called for a family meeting in the grand hall. The portraits of ancestors stared down as relatives gathered, muttering in confusion. Helen sat at the head of the table, her arms crossed, her gaze sharp as a knife. Claire stood at the opposite end, her hands firm on the leather folder. "I have proof," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. She laid the contracts on the table, pointing to her father's signature. "This is what he wanted us to know. This is the truth he tried to hide but couldn't deny." One by one, the relatives leaned forward, reading the documents. Murmurs spread through the room. Some gasped. Others shook their heads in disbelief. But the evidence was undeniable. Helen's face turned pale. She reached for the papers, but Claire pulled them back. "No more lies, Aunt. No more pretending." The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, Claire felt the balance shift. The truth was no longer just in her heart. It was laid bare for everyone to see. Yet she knew the fight wasn't over. The question was whether her family would embrace the truth or cast her out for exposing it. And as the meeting ended in uneasy silence, Claire realized she was standing at the edge of a battle that could either destroy her place in the family or finally give Rose the recognition she deserved. The mansion was quiet after the storm of revelations, but the silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, charged with the weight of denial, guilt, and the undeniable evidence Claire had laid before them. She sat alone in the grand hall, the documents still spread across the table, staring at her father's handwriting one more time. His words echoed inside her. One day, Claire must know. The following morning, the house felt different. Some relatives avoided her altogether, whispering in corners. Others looked at her with uncertain eyes, caught between the loyalty to Helen and the undeniable truth that Claire had exposed. The tension was thick, but she could sense that change was beginning, small as a flicker. Helen, however, was relentless. At breakfast, she slammed her teacup down and glared across the table. "You've embarrassed us all. Do you think you're noble, Claire? All you've done is dishonor your father's legacy." Claire met her gaze without flinching. "I'm not dishonoring him. I'm honoring the woman who saved him, who saved all of us. You can't erase that anymore." The words cut through the air. Helen rose abruptly and stormed out, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. For once, her authority no longer seemed absolute. Later that day, Claire received a quiet knock on her door. When she opened it, her cousin Margaret stood there, holding one of the letters Claire had shared. Her eyes were damp. "I didn't want to admit it yesterday," she whispered. "But you're right. I remember Rose sitting with me when I was sick as a child. She held my hand when my mother didn't even notice. She was more than a nanny. She was family." Claire's throat tightened. "Thank you for saying that." Margaret nodded. "Others will see it too. They just need time. Don't give up." Those words fueled Claire's resolve. She spent the next week gathering more testimonies. Former employees visited the mansion at her request, each one recounting how Rose had quietly carried the weight of the household when no one else could. One spoke of nights when creditors banged at the gates, and Rose negotiated with them herself. Another described how she often went without meals so the children could have enough. Each story carved deeper into the truth, dismantling Helen's wall of denial brick by brick. But the breakthrough came from the most unexpected place. One evening, Claire found her younger cousin Thomas in the library, staring at the portrait of Rose that she had rescued from a forgotten hallway. He turned to her, his expression conflicted. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did she really give everything for us?" Claire nodded softly. Yes, and we ignored her for it. Thomas's lips trembled. I was just a child, but I remember her singing to me at night when I had nightmares. I thought she was just doing her job. But now I see she gave me more comfort than anyone else. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. She loved us as her own. That's why it's our responsibility to love her back, even now. The boy's eyes filled with tears. For Claire, it was a sign. The tide was shifting. Still, Helen remained the greatest obstacle. She called another family meeting, determined to seize control. Standing at the head of the table, she declared in a commanding tone, "We will not allow this house to become a shrine to a servant. Our family's reputation depends on preserving dignity, not clinging to sentimental nonsense." But this time, murmurs rose from the others. Margaret spoke up. "It's not nonsense. Claire has shown us the truth. We can't ignore it anymore." Thomas added, his voice cracking but brave. "Rose was there for me when no one else was. If honoring her is sentimental, then maybe that's what we need." The room buzzed with unease. Helen's face hardened, her power slipping through her fingers. Claire stood, her voice calm but strong. "You say reputation is dignity, Aunt. But true dignity comes from acknowledging the people who carried us when we couldn't stand on our own. Rose gave everything for this family, and pretending otherwise doesn't protect our name. It destroys it." The silence that followed was not the silence of rejection this time. It was the silence of truth, settling into reluctant hearts. Helen, cornered, left the room without another word. With the resistance weakened, Claire moved forward with her plan. Weeks later, the mansion opened its doors to an event unlike any it had ever hosted. There were no lavish decorations, no sparkling chandeliers meant to impress business partners. Instead, flowers filled the grand hall, simple white lilies and roses, and at the center hung a restored portrait of Rose, placed in the position of honor where once the patriarch's painting had dominated. Family members, former employees, and even townspeople who remembered Rose attended. Claire stood at the front, her voice steady as she addressed them. Rose was not just a caretaker, she was the foundation beneath our lives, the quiet force who gave up her own future so that we could have one. My father knew it, even if he never admitted it aloud. And today, we acknowledge what should have been acknowledged long ago. We owe everything to her. The hall filled with emotion. Some relatives wept openly. Others approached the portrait, laying flowers at its base. For the first time, Rose's name was spoken not as an afterthought, but as the centerpiece of their story. Claire felt an immense peace settle over her. The guilt that had weighed on her since the first letter had transformed into gratitude. Looking at the portrait, she whispered softly, "Now they know, Rose. Now the world knows." That night, after the guests had left and the mansion grew quiet again, Claire stood alone in the hall. She gazed at Rose's portrait, illuminated by the soft glow of candlelight, and felt as though the woman's eyes watched her with pride. In that moment, Claire understood something deeper than she ever had before. Wealth, titles, and appearances meant nothing if they were built on silence and lies. True legacy was carved in love, in sacrifice, in the invisible strength of those who asked for nothing in return. She turned toward the camera of her own thoughts, as if addressing every heart willing to listen. "This story isn't just mine," she said quietly. "It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we overlook. And the question we all have to ask is, when the truth is right in front of us, will we be brave enough to see it? And if you've stayed with me until now, don't forget to like this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful tales like this one. Because maybe the next story will be the one that changes the way you see your own life."